science fiction. We make no guarantees, however, how long it will remain fiction. Fiction. Fiction.
Magic Moon Monday Cognonauts, and welcome to ExoFathom. With over 89 hours of conversations, we bravely walk into the garden of mental turbulence, aiming to explore the outermost edges of our understanding. And this is ExoFathom. I'm joined by my two co-hosts, Nick and Mike. How are you guys doing on this waning gibbous evening?
Happy Moon Day.
Moon!
Ha 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 ha.
Nice.
I'm good. How are you?
Good. How about you, Mike?
I'm alive. I'm waiting for the moon to come out.
Yeah. I had a really weird realization last week. Everybody was saying it was a full moon, and this was like Friday or Thursday. So I went on a run because usually the moon, when it's out, it's like, I know where it is. I've been seeing it all month. But the one day that they said there was this big supermoon, I didn't see any moon in the sky. And I thought that was weird. I don't know if it was a foggy day, but did you guys see a full moon last week?
No, I maybe they hid it from you. I'm not sure.
I mean, I kind of think they did. It's just like, I understand why I don't see the moon. But no, go ahead.
It was there.
It was there.
I saw it every night. I was out. It was there.
Allegedly.
Mhm.
Well, so obviously, guys, tonight we're talking about moons. There's an article that came out in the BBC that I thought was kind of interesting. And, I think, it's good to just think about the moon. It does a lot of stuff. It's there. Helps shield us from asteroids. But Nick and Mike, I'll first start out by just asking, what comes to mind when you think about the moon?
I mean, nighttime off the bat. And then I guess if I'm digging a bit deeper into the metaphysical, I would say like the opposite of yin energy, the yang, the cool energy, the, more notably the female energy, if you're going to put those two into that sort of binary. But yeah, the more cooling energy, the more subdued, the tides, lots of things.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
First thing is we don't have enough of them. I want 3 moons.
That'd be cool.
Dude,
right?
Totally.
Be able to slingshot off each one if you're going through space. It'd be nice.
I don't know about. Oh yeah, I guess you're right. That would be kind of cool.
And I guess metaphysically, I've always attached the moon to Dionysian type activities, just because I go out at night, I go to the bar and stuff. Mm-hmm. So indulging a little bit, I guess, too, of overindulging, I guess a bit more of the feminine energy, I guess you can say, more socializing versus daytime, which is much more about just getting stuff done, whether it be work or study or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
So that sort of along the same lines, just I guess in a Western context. That's how I've always felt about the moon. It's I don't know if it's cooler energy or if it just ramps me up more, where I can just start to party more, I guess.
Right. Well, and in LA, it's usually hot all day, and then the moon comes out, and you're like, yeah, let's go sit on a patio somewhere and enjoy the moonlight, I guess.
Get drunk and talk about moons.
Talk about moons, yeah. I'm missing a beer. I should have some tea or something like that. But moons are kind of funny too, because when you think about it, the sun is just always the sun. It's just there. But aside from an eclipse or something. But with our moon, we have the new moon, the eclipse, the super moon, the blood moon, the full moon, the blue moon. There's so much literature about the moon, and there's so many phases and so many meaning interpretations about the moon.
There's a whole calendar about it.
There's a whole calendar about the moon, right? And like tides. I mean, when you really start thinking about it, you know, we love our moon. And, you know, before I get into some of like the cultural significance that the moon has played, I'm just curious, for either of you, have you ever felt influenced by the moon?
I don't know if I could say that I have. I've definitely I felt the influence of evening and, you know, the accompaniment of a moon. I guess the closest I've ever felt to like a change is maybe on a full moon when it's, you know, night outside, but the moon is so bright that you can just kind of walk around like it's daytime.
Yeah,
That kind of makes me think about, you know, our ancient ancestors and how much of a blessing that must have been to have a full moon at least once a month where you could see things at nighttime instead of
absolutely.
being afraid of all the monsters.
True. Good point.
That's why you make fire, though.
Yeah. But even on a full moon, I mean, you know, you can see so much farther than with just a fire.
Yeah, that's true. Sure. I mean, I tend to be a night owl or a night hawk, however you want to describe it. So
Nighthawk.
it's a great painting. I definitely feel like I guess influenced by the moon. Like I tend to come a bit more alive whenever it's night versus daytime. I mean, like my natural, even like my natural circadian rhythm, I tend to sleep throughout the day from like 6 a.m. to 3 p.m. and then be up at night. That seems to how it works. So that has to be some influence by the moon somehow.
Yeah, definitely. You're like a nocturnal mammal, it would seem.
Just like a
Like a bat.
vampire or something.
Like a bat. Well, yeah, no, and it's interesting you both brought up sleep and sort of like this evolutionary perspective. There was a sleep study out of the University of Basel in Switzerland. Now, this was in July 2019, but it was featured in a National Geographic article. And it reminded us that mammals evolved through what is called the nocturnal bottleneck. So I thought this was kind of interesting. When dinosaurs roamed the earth by day, the night represented a window of opportunity for a new group of vertebrates to evolve. Therefore, we can deduce that since the evidence tells us that hominoids, ape-like creatures, hunted, thrived, and evolved on the banks of water bodies, they would have been more active during a full moon. When the gravitational pull on the water is strongest, the tides vary, and aquatic prey are on the move, mating and generally more accessible and vulnerable. The light of the full moon would have also allowed the predatory hominoids to hunt longer and later into the night. And extended and increased wakefulness during a full moon would have also enhanced their alert response, helping them avoid or evade predators. There might have even been a circa-lunar rhythm that synchronized reproductive behaviors in our ancestors, as it still does for some modern marine and land animals today. So I thought that was kind of interesting because if you think about it from like modern humans to our, you know, far removed ancestors, the role of the moon would have been quite different. You know, there wouldn't be any of this city light noise. You wouldn't really have lamps. You'd have fires, but even a fire, you know, like if, yeah, I mean, I don't know. That got me kind of thinking about how much more of a role the moon would play. Like you said, Nick, it would be out in the nighttime. You'd be hunting. Seems like people were getting their groove on. And just to think about how different that is to the way we live now. I mean, that's like a full 180. And like Mike was saying, he's kind of a night owl that's deemed more like the minority of sleeping, right? Most people are awake during the day, but maybe that's how we were.
Yeah, it makes sense, right? Because if you think about 65 million years ago, there were dinosaurs roaming the earth and they're lizards, so they're most active during the daytime. It would make sense that our far ancient ancestors, the simple shrew, would be poking around at nighttime when all the lizards are asleep and they can't be eaten. So yeah, I mean, it makes a whole lot of sense as to why mammals tend to have this sort of nocturnal proclivities. And you think about big cats. Big cats hunt at night almost exclusively, except for lions sometimes, but they even prefer to hunt at night as well. So, you know, there's a lot of activity going on at night, and which is probably perhaps why we decided to sort of retreat from the world at nighttime, because maybe there were more dangers than during the day when you could spot them. And perhaps we had to kind of like learn to stay home at nighttime and maybe stay within the village perimeters instead of going out unless it's a full moon where you can see.
Yeah. And I wonder if that ends up tying back to like the moon goddesses, right? Because there's in our myths, there's far more moon goddesses than moon gods, right? The two, I think they're the same goddess, but the two that bounce off of my head immediately are Selene and Cynthia, I believe, are the names. But I think they're like the Greek moon goddess or something like that. Or both names are.
Yeah. Lunar.
Yeah, so it would like you have to stay safe within that village, right? Almost like it's like that womb of sorts.
Yeah.
So that or the full moon, it provides light again. So, I mean, yeah, I just wonder if that ends up tying back to the more goddesses that we have.
It is interesting. Yeah. I would wonder if there are any male moon gods, to be honest.
Are actually.
Oh, okay, cool.
Have to look them. I know one was in the Norse tradition, but and I think it's just interesting to go back to like the dinosaur discussion, because in this little book they were talking about the Nocturnal Bottleneck. And so it's interesting, right? Because if there's dinosaurs, they're warm. They have to go out in the daytime. They're less active in the evening. It's safer at night. Then as you get to more mammalian predators, like those cats and things like that, you would maybe see this shift. But then I wonder if there's still something in us that tethers itself to the moon. That's, something that we've evolved out of, or maybe we've just evolved and it's like some sort of moon sense that acts as like an appendix, and not all of us are actually using it, but maybe some of us are.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know that Tolkien writes in the Silmarillion and sort of his epic of Lord of the Rings, he talks about the elves and how the elves have a love, like an almost a romantic love of the stars, because when the elves were created, there was no sunlight. It was all starlight. And so when they look upon the stars at night, they remember the beginnings of their species. And that's why they have such a love and affinity for nighttime and stars. So, I mean, I could definitely see how being really attached to the moon or attached to the cycles, you can set your clock to it. Basically, it is our first clock. I mean, aside from the sun, the moon was our night clock. So, I mean, it would make sense that we have these sort of like relics from the past that kind of propel our fascination with it.
And the dinosaurs, the mammals. I don't know if it's like an appendix type thing, but it could be like a sensitivity to light, maybe. Like the you don't need sunglasses at night, of course, right? So maybe there was something a long time ago that allowed us to, like, it was just more comfortable and like obviously a little less dangerous at one point to go out on a full moon, but then it became more dangerous and then now less dangerous as we are now. I mean, there's a lot of I drive around LA a lot at night, and it's not as dangerous as you hear on the news, which is kind of strange to think about. Like, I haven't ran into that many dangerous situations.
Yeah.
So like the danger of the night might be something, a relic of an old past, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, definitely. Well, and I think too, like it's such a misnomer to think that like danger happens in dangerous places, because usually the dangerous things happen in really random places, and can happen anywhere. But I mean, like, in the sense that, yeah, like you can drive around at night and it is mostly peaceful. I remember my night driving days, because that is an LA thing to do, right? Just like you're bored, you don't know what to do, and you're like, I'm just gonna go drive along the beach. And I just remember, yeah, it's very quiet. You're like, wow, most of the city is sleeping. And there's kind of like a treat to being out, I think. What's kind of interesting is thinking about the sun and whether it would have been harmful to our eyes, because, you know, they talk about the amount of light that you get and how that can affect your circadian rhythms, and also just general health. But they've also talked about the difference in eye color. And I'm curious if you zoom way back, if you would have noticed that like humanoids with really light eye colors with more sensitivity maybe to the sun might have been more nocturnal versus, folks with like darker eyes. I don't know.
Aren't lighter eyes relatively new
I don't know.
by like hundreds of thousands of years?
That sounds like a kind of like an exo bit, because now I'm curious about just eyes, because I know rods and cones are really weird, but then like there's been some recent studies about like just the interplay of the way that our eyes do like biofeedback to our brain, which would be kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Going back
Well.
to the light and sound episode. I mean, it does affect your mood.
Right.
So,
Right.
I can see where, like, outside of the circadian rhythm, that just maybe being out in the day, people were generally happier, just less afraid. Like, because you don't have to be, I guess, as much as on guard as you think you would need to be during the night. Right. So maybe there's. So I don't know. Maybe I'm just spitballing here.
Yeah. Well, okay. I appreciate it. And yeah, I mean, there's probably so much that you could go into about like nighttime and danger and stuff. And because even like in the 1920s, I'm sure it wasn't that dangerous, but if you were out, you might be caught by like, the anti-booze people. What was that? Prohibition times? I don't know. Now I'm just rambling.
And the wives against the temperance movement. Those nice ladies that started prohibition.
Interesting. Well, okay. Well, we're getting off track.
A bunch of wives that didn't like their husbands going out to bars late at night because apparently it was bad for the family unit, so they pressed the temperance movement and ended up becoming prohibition. And
interesting.
Yeah, that didn't work too well in the long run. Organized crime ends up stemming from that, and bootlegging and all that fun stuff. But yeah, no, also happens at night, right? Because all those like little shady activities you can get away with. You think that it's easier to get away with it at night. There's an interesting juxtaposition. So like most horror movies, at least, or slashers and things like that, take place over the course of one night.
Yeah.
You have something like Schindler's List, though, that takes place pretty much exclusively in the daytime, where the reality is most of the horrible atrocities that happen during the day and right in front of you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, that makes perfect sense. I was just reading an article about Midsummer, and they said that one of the intentional creepy factors of the film was that it was predominantly shot in the daytime, where you have these horrific scenes shot during daytime, and our brains like the predictability of danger associated with night. So when there's danger happening in the sun time, it's like even more disturbing for us, I think, is the logic there.
And it could just be tied back to, like we were talking about light sensitivity earlier. Just the idea that you can see more in the day, so you feel safer, right? But if you're somebody who has some sort of sensory sensitivity, then night might be a little bit easier for you to do stuff in, because it's not so much, you don't get like the overstimulating effect to your senses.
Well, I think night also offers sort of a double-edged sword, right? It gives you the opportunity to be the prey, but it also gives you opportunity to be the hunter and to ambush and to get the better of your prey. So I think that there's a certain level of empowerment that we still feel left over about nighttime, speaking on the sort of like inclination to do shady things at night. I think there's
Yeah.
there's sort
Speaking
of
to
like
that.
I think there's sort of a remnant of that where it's like, hunting at night, if you were a good skilled hunter, you could get right on top of a, pack of mammoth or buffalo or wildebeest or whatever, and ambush them, and that would be so much easier, and that gives you that sort of puts you in the mode of the predator. And so perhaps we have that sort of left over from us as well.
Well, this is all, yeah. I mean, well, this is fascinating because, it's a conversation about the moon, but the moon comes out at the nighttime. And in fact, it's the light that presents itself, in the darkness. And so I think there's lots of parallels. And again, lots of reason why our ancestors would have made so many correlations and rituals around it. And just to go off of some interesting stats that I found. So a couple of funny things that might happen during like a full moon per se, and interrupt me if you have any thoughts about any of them. But one of them I didn't know. One of the first things was that your dog might need a trip to the ER. They said that in the days surrounding a full moon, researchers have found that dogs have a 28% higher chance of visiting the emergency room. The exact cause is not determined, although a possibility is that taking your dog out during a full moon is definitely charming, but increases the chance of them getting hurt, which is kind of sad. They also say that tides will be more dramatic, right? So gravity causes the tides to rise and fall, so it's going to be more intense during a full moon. Birth rates can increase. There is apparently an increased birth rate during the full moon. So it's a myth, but it turns out to have some scientific backing. Researchers in Kyoto, Japan, tracked 1,000 births in private hospitals, and they found out that more babies were born closer to the moon. They found that more babies were born the closer the moon was to the Earth, when the gravitational pull is the strongest, which I thought was kind of interesting. But they did say, although the effect was only seen with supermoons, which are much closer to the Earth than a regular full moon. It's kind of interesting there. You might see more crimes being committed. Sleep could be affected. Everyone's mood may change. Surgery results could be slightly better. Sea turtles will want to lay eggs. Plants may grow better. And coral may reproduce at a higher rate. So those are just a couple of fun factoids about some of the trends people have noticed. One thing I wanted to touch on was crime rates, because we were talking about crime and stuff. Apparently 11,613 cases of aggravated assault in a 5-year period tended to occur more often around the full moon. And admissions and transfers to a Department of Psychiatry over a 1-year period, there was more need to use chemical restraints on a full moon and new moon days than on other days. And in a 1-year period, there were more crimes frequently committed during a full moon, out of 34,000 crimes. So I thought that was kind of interesting that, there is something odd about higher rates of maybe just like tension during those times.
But they only did it over the course of 1 year, not like a multi-decade multi-year study.
This one has a 5-year study. The other two were a 1-year study. And then, let's see, let me go to this other one. This one says, many people say the full moon brings about an increase in crime rates. And while that might be true, we can blame it on statistics more than anything else. So to just counter all of that, science writer Benjamin Radford says people are more active during full moons than moonless nights. With the extra light, innocent people and criminals alike are drawn out into the mix. It's not the best and can lead to an increase in theft and crime. If there is even slightly more activity, any activity on a full moon night, then that may translate into a slight but real increase in crime, accidents, and injuries, he said. So here he's talking about just kind of the statistical anomaly of more light, more people, hence more crimes. So I don't know. Do you guys think that's all it is, or do you think maybe there's some mood influences that might be happening there too?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that that's a very simplistic answer, which is probably close to the truth. But I mean, we also know that mythology surrounding moon madness has been around us for quite some time. Now, of course, that you could use those same explainers for throughout all of human history, I suppose. But at some point there becomes I don't know, like to me sometimes it's like, okay, well, we're trying to explain away these things that have happened for thousands of years, and then if we call them just mere nonsense, at some point, like, they do become sort of real if they have been thought of and used as motifs for thousands of years. Like, at what point do they at what point do they become some sort of facsimile of realness? And so, there's probably a psychologically deep reason for an increase in maybe perhaps emotionality during a full moon, which might lead to, people making decisions they normally wouldn't.
Well, I wondered. I don't know if I would want less light if I'm going to go out at night and commit a crime, right? You think like you would not want to be seen, but I can understand where there's more people coming out just in general. So I get that. And then the emotionality thing. I mean, it's kind of like that. I'll use like the Black Knight satellite argument. Right? Like if gravity's a weak force that can manipulate. Like if you look at it from a signal processing point of view, gravity might be able to affect your thoughts. That full moon being closer or what have you, it affecting the tides, making it more dramatic, might make you more dramatic in a way, just a more extreme version of yourself. And our brains sit in liquid, so like there could be some strange things happening there too, maybe.
I like where your mind is going, because I, as Nick was speaking, I was thinking about astrology, and the moon sign is tethered to like your emotions, your reactivity, kind of like your, I guess it's like your internal self. And then a lot of the like water signs get associated with this lunar activity, lots of like emotionality, which I find interesting from kind of like what Nick was saying from like that mythos perspective. And then looking at some of the statistics. And this is where we're going to get to this article that I think kind of brings all these ideas together. So just 3 points. This is under the section psychosis that I have here. So 18,495 records from patients admitted to a psychiatric hospital in an 11-year period. The admissions for psychosis were highest during the new moon and lowest during the full moon, which is a little bit odd. It like switched, but that's for psychosis. Then they have another one, 25,568 psychiatric emergency room visits observed in a 13-year period. Visits increased near the first quarter moon and decreased around the new moon and full moon. And there's another one, the number of psychiatric hospital admissions for schizophrenia over a 6-year period, highest during first quarter moon, followed by full moon, and lowest at the new moon. But one of the things that I noticed, and these stats come from Chudler at the University of Washington. And at the very end, most of the statistics ended up having no correlation. Or, as you heard here, there were opposite correlations. And so, just thinking about gravitational force, distance from the moon to the Earth seeming to be a factor, it does seem to me that having this broad scale observation is less helpful than maybe a more individualized approach. And that's where we get to hear the story about a 35-year-old man named David Avery. And, oh wait, is his name David Avery? I think it's just the David Avery Psychiatric Clinic. So this is going to get into a little bit of a story. But before I go there, did you have any thoughts about the statistics and ideas about why there could be correlations? I know, Mike, you had some good ideas on your end. I'm curious, Nick, any...
Well, I mean, if you want to look at it through a very specific, scientific framework, a moon cycle is what, 28 days, so about a month. You could really throw any sort of variables onto a month cycle and see where the certain things aggregate at different points of the lunar phase. So I don't know. I mean, it is possible that these are all just coincidences, and we're looking at it through a kind of a pareidolia where we're seeing all of these clusters of events and then saying, well, this happens on a half moon and this happens on a waning gibbous moon, and so I mean, like, it is possible that we're trying to make sense out of things that perhaps are just more random.
But we have a word, though. We have the word lunacy, lunatic.
Yeah.
There has to be some correlation.
Well, I'm sure there's a psychological correlation for sure. Yeah, I don't know about the statistics and all of the, because to me it sounds like you could just take a month's worth of crimes and be like, oh well, more happened towards the end of the paycheck than the beginning of the paycheck, which would make sense, and if you're
Right.
getting paid right, as soon as the full moon hits, or you're on your last week of not being paid when the full moon hits, you might be more prone to do something dumb.
See?
Yeah, that's why I was that's why I wanted to see, like, multi-year, multi-decade study, because then you can kind of control those things and isolate the moon.
Let's isolate the moon. Well, yeah, and so that's why this article was so interesting. It came out from the BBC. It was written by Linda Geddes, and she just has a little subtitle that says, the idea that the lunar cycle can influence people's behavior dates back thousands of years, but has largely been dismissed by modern medicine. New research, however, suggests that there may be some truth to these ancient theories. And so it starts out about this 35-year-old man. He was an engineer, and he was sitting in this psychiatric clinic. Because he was an engineer, he liked to solve problems. And of course, the problem haunting him was that he was admitted to the psychiatric ward, and his issues were just mood related. He swung violently from one extreme to the other, sometimes having suicidal fantasies or seeing and hearing things that weren't there. Now, the man's sleep pattern was similarly erratic, veering from near total insomnia to getting 12 full hours per night. And again, being a problem solver, the man had been keeping really meticulous records of these patterns, trying to make sense of it all. After some time, it was seen that the mood and the sleep patterns were tracking the rise and the fall of the Earth's oceans, which of course are driven by the gravitational pull of the moon. So it seemed that when there was high tide, it would be happening, his sleep would be really short, and then there would be some sort of, flip. And he initially dismissed his hunch as lunacy, but I know, right? Pun in turn. But even if the man's mood cycles were in sync with the moon, he had no mechanism to explain it or any ideas about what to do about it. And the patient was prescribed drugs and light therapy to stabilize his mood and his sleep, and eventually he was discharged. And that particular case was shut, as they would say, because again, there's no way to do anything with that. But 12 years later, a psychiatrist by the name Thomas Weir, W-E-H-R, he published a paper where 17 patients with rapid cycling bipolar disorder, a form of the illness where people switch between depression and mania more quickly than usual, and this would be similar to this other guy, the engineer, they also showed an uncanny regularity in their episodes of illness. And the thing that struck me about these cycles was that they seemed uncannily precise in a way that one would not necessarily suspect of a biological process. It's a quote from Dr. Weir. He says, it led me to wonder if there was some kind of external influence that was operating on these cycles. And because of the historical belief that the moon affects human behavior, the obvious thing to consider was whether or not there was some lunar influence. So let me just stop there for a minute. What do we think so far? Do we think that there could be something specific to this very specific issue? Could it just be this observed study? Could it be...
Maybe he had a fatty tumor in his brain that had a whole bunch of fluid in it and was influenced by...
Wow. That is a really specific... Maybe? You don't know. I mean, maybe.
I'm just trying to think, like, you know, it would make sense that maybe if you have some sort of brain abnormality, perhaps an increased, even so slight gravitational pull might throw something out of whack. But that would be, I mean, that's a very sensitive instrument right there. I don't know.
True. Yeah. And also too, there's like a difference between the physical brain and then also like our conscious experience of that brain. And to just wonder if one is informing the other, you know, like, could it be somehow all these patients, like, I don't know, maybe on their way to the doctor's office, there's like a lunar calendar and they all fixed, I don't know, subconscious. I don't know. I mean, there could be other factors. You never know.
They all laid a fortune cookie that said, it's the moon's fault.
Right. Yeah, totally. They could have. Mike, I feel like a detective here. Any theories, Watson?
No, just crazy people being crazy. No, I'm just kidding.
Lunaticus,
right.
Which also means moonstruck in Latin.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's where the word lunacy comes from, which is moonstruck. Like, what did they know? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, it's true. So there's this. It could just be like two similar people with mental illnesses behaving in similar patterns. The same way that, you know, if, like people who with psychological defects tend to find each other and tend to become like romantic partners. Or it could just be something where they sync up more naturally. I'm just trying to throw out the moon completely, but I also wouldn't be shocked if they're just a group of people that are, you know, more sensitive to the move. Yeah, exactly. More sensitive to the gravitational pull of said moon, just like there are people who are more sensitive to light or something like that.
Right. Well, and I think, you know, these are all great ideas. And what's interesting about this article is they talk about kind of like, you know, making sense of this. And, you know, so they touch a little bit on some of the older theories, which we can circle back to, because again, there's no answers in this. So I think it'll be kind of cool because I did learn something, which I'm excited to share. So I'm trying not to read the whole thing because it's a really great article, but it's just some highlights. So shelve this study for a minute and think about sleep and lunar cycles, right? So sleep is going to vary across the lunar cycle. There was a 2013 study that was conducted under highly controlled conditions in a sleep laboratory that found people took about 5 minutes longer to fall asleep on average, and they slept 20 minutes less overall around a full moon compared to the rest of the month, even though they weren't exposed to any moonlight. So, you know, some people talk about photosensitivity, light impact, you know, like if there's more bright moon, then you can't sleep as well. But these people, that was like not a factor. However, measurement of their brain activity while they were sleeping actually suggested that the amount of deep sleep that they experienced dropped by 30% during the full moon, which I think is kind of interesting because having had insomnia and had bouts where I just, like I had my little Fitbit and I was not getting my deep sleep and I could see that measured, I felt like dog poo-poo. And like, I can only imagine if you're already starting out with like a mood disorder or something like that, how much more of a dramatic presentation loss of deep sleep could be. So for me, just that alone seemed kind of like a good correlative thought. But I'm curious, do you guys think the same thing? Do you think sleep really matters that much, or?
Well, yeah, it
Yeah.
definitely matters.
Sleep deprivation is a real bitch.
Yeah, it is.
If you can operate with very little sleep. I'm an insomniac as well. I've always had a hard time sleeping since I was a kid, though.
Oof.
But like if you don't sleep for 24 hours, for example, you're actually worse at driving than somebody who is legally drunk. You're more
You
impaired.
just pulled that out of my head. I was thinking the exact same thing. Yeah, like 100%. There are real consequences to it for sure.
So if you have a mood disorder or even just an irritable person, like if you have any sort of addictions, the legal addictions would say like caffeine or nicotine, I can only imagine that the sleep depth doesn't do you any favors at all for being polite or, doing any sort of pleasantries with anybody. And especially if you're not particularly agreeable as a person, if you tend to be more disagreeable, it just
Right.
accents that whole behavior.
The ascension begins. Absolutely. And, one would imagine they'd close the book after finding that out, right? Like, oh, bada bing, bada boom, we figured it out. The problem is that they tried to recreate that study and they were unable to replicate the findings, which is a big problem. One of the Oxford sleep researchers said that one of the issues was that they didn't monitor individual patients' sleep over an entire month or many months. So it was a 1-month study. This researcher said the only way to do it systematically is to record the very same individual over and over for like a year or something like that. Which interestingly is precisely what Weir did in his study of bipolar patients. So in some cases, he was tracking the dates of their mood episodes for years because he was noticing that people differ in how they respond to the lunar cycles. And so really the only way to find anything is to look at each person individually over time. And that's when you start to see replicatable patterns come out. In this case, he was noticing that his patients fell into one of two categories, and this is where stuff gets really juicy. Some people's mood swings appeared to follow a 14.8-day cycle. Meanwhile, others followed a 13.7-day cycle, although some of them occasionally switched back between the two. So now let's see here. Oh, okay. So thinking about those two numbers, the moon affects Earth in several different ways. The first and most obvious is through the provision of moonlight. So with the full moon coming around every 29.5 days and a new moon following 14.8 days after that. Then there's the moon's gravitational pull, which creates the ocean tides that rise and fall every 12.4 hours. The height of those tides also follows roughly 2-week cycles. The 14.8-day, quote, spring neap cycle, which is driven by the combined pull of the moon and the sun, versus the 13.7-day, quote, declination cycle, which is driven by the moon's position relative to Earth's equator. Kind of gnarly that these numbers are matching up. And so it's these roughly 2-week cycles in the height of the tides that Weir's patients appear to synchronize with one or the other. It's not that they necessarily would switch into depression or mania every 13.7 or 14.8 days. It's just that if a switch occurred from depression to mania, it didn't happen at just any time. It tended to occur during a certain phase of those lunar tidal cycles. And then after reading about that's a hard word for me, Weir's research, Avery picked up the telephone and they reanalyzed the engineer's data. Remember that 35-year-old guy from at this point, maybe 14 years prior, they found out that he too showed a 14.8-day pattern in his mood cycles. which really gave me the chills, because I mean, I only partially understand these 2-day patterns, but at the same time, it does seem to be more evidential. It seems a little less wormy than the other examples. Is that just me?
I don't know. I mean, I guess it could. I mean, what I was thinking about this whole time is just kind of this concept that it seems like it's in the moon's domain to repair and to rebuild. You had mentioned something about coral reefs rebuilding faster under moonlight. And so perhaps there is this this qualia about the moon that allows people to sort of repair and reboot. And you think about the phases and the cycles of the moon. Well, it takes about 14 days for one completion of a cycle. It would make sense that perhaps if there's a macrocosm, that maybe we are part of that in a microcosmic way, and that we have a sort of like 14-day mind loop thing going on. Where maybe it's not that we're perhaps for people who aren't suffering from bipolar disorder or anything like that, maybe it's just it takes on a different mechanism, or it takes on a different characteristic. But perhaps with people who have severe mental illness, then you start to see these come out more prominently, because that's something you can recognize and look for. Whereas like if a normal healthy person went through a 14-day cycle, perhaps they thought of carrots on the first day, and then 14 days later they thought of carrots again. What I mean? And they're not putting that together because that's just random. But perhaps there's some sort of cycling going on within our own brains as well.
Yeah. And it would be interesting to see. I think you're right, Nick, in the sense that like mental illnesses are just the extremes, right? So those extremes are always easier to see. But there's also, just people going through moods that aren't as extreme, but still kind of noticeable, whether it be men or women. So it'd be interesting to see if that's also tied down to some sort of lunar cycle. But I wonder too, because if it's a gravitational thing, then it should affect all animals on Earth, right? We're not anything particularly special except for maybe using tools. So I wonder if some of those night those predators at night that hunt through the night, if they get more kills during a full moon, or if there's some sort of way to quantize their behavior and see if there's any cycles that they go through. Because then you can kind of get a better view that like something actually might be happening here, and with humans it just affects our moods or something.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and so I think you guys are siding with what some of the critics who said that, this connection is believable but complex, or one has no idea what the exact mechanisms are. That could be, factors behind the veil, so to speak. And also too, what is to be theorized from that? If you were to assume it was a sleep deprivation situation, because sleep deprivation can actually be used to lift bipolar patients out of depression. And there's a lot of studies about sleep and mental wellness and things like that. The question is, well, again, how is the sleep being disturbed? What is the connection? Now, some people have postulated that it's light, but as we already talked about, we have so much light pollution now, and indoors we're exposed to artificial light. So that doesn't seem to be as likely a culprit as, say, gravitational pull. So this is where another theory is introduced. And again, it's just a theory. It says, one idea is that this triggers subtle fluctuations in the Earth's magnetic field to which some people might be sensitive. So the oceans are electrically conducting because they're made of salt water. And as they flow around with the tides, that has a magnetic field associated with it. And this is from Robert Wickes, who's a space weather expert at the University College London. But still, the effect is tiny, and whether the moon's effect on the Earth's magnetic field is strong enough to induce biological changes is unclear. But At the same time, there have been some studies that linked solar activity to increases in heart attacks and strokes, epileptic fits, schizophrenia, and suicides. And when solar flares or coronal mass ejections hit the Earth's magnetic field, this induces invisible electric currents that are strong enough to knock out power grids, and which some have suggested could also affect electrically sensitive cells in both the heart and the brain. And so here's another quote from Wikis, the space weather expert. He says, "The problem is not that it's not possible that these things may happen. It's that the research into it is very limited, so it's very hard to say anything definitive." So I thought that was kind of interesting to think about it, not so much about the gravitational pull of the moon, but how the gravitational pull of the moon affects the tides, which affects
Magnetism.
magnetic fields associated with the Earth, and whether or not those changes that biological creatures such as humans are sensitive to that. I mean, God, that's a lot of layers, but interesting.
I mean,
to
it
say
all
the
makes
least.
it all makes sense. I mean, like if you think of all of the ionized particles that the ocean emits, positively charged, negatively charged, they're going to have an effect on not just humans but the entire wildlife. And so, it would make sense that when a moon is full, it has more pull on the oceans. It's churning up more oceans, creating much more positively charged atmosphere. And yeah, I mean, we are just little antennae for the sort of the energetic grid that hovers above us. So it would make sense as to why it affects us even subtly.
And there's the hypothesis too that we used to navigate by feeling the Earth's magnetic forces before we had compasses.
Ooh, you're talking about that
Compasses,
magnetic
compass.
sense.
Yeah, you can actually get. I believe I read this
Fruit
a few
flies?
years ago. No, you could get an implant that will help you sense the Earth's magnetic field, and a lot of people say it feels like they're reconnecting to a sense that they lost.
Oh my God.
And through through just settling down like the agricultural revolution, we could have started to lose this sense. I would say, or needed it less and less, like an appendage that we no longer use, or that appendix you were talking about earlier.
Right,
So
right.
that could be one other angle where it can affect us, whether it be just through mood or behavior.
Yeah, well, and so on to that topic, let's see, so there's certain birds, fish, and insects that do have a provable magnetic sense, that they are sensitive to these things. Humans, however, are not generally considered to possess this sense. However, again, a study published earlier this year, actually that would have been like 2019, I want to say, found that when people were exposed to magnetic field changes equivalent to those we experience as we move around our local environment, they actually experienced a strong decrease in brain alpha wave activity. So I'll repeat that. They were exposed to magnetic field changes, and then they experienced strong decreases in brain alpha wave activity. Now, brain alpha wave activity is going to be what you're feeling like during wakeful relaxation. So think about meditative states. Think about when you feel really calm. And here it says alpha waves are produced when we are awake but not performing any specific task. So it's just kind of like that downtime. And so it's interesting because if more alpha waves signals relaxation, then a decrease in alpha wave activity, I would imagine, would introduce stress. And I think when you introduce stressors into any environment, be that one that's, bipolar or otherwise, that's generally not a good thing. But it still is unclear. This may be an irrelevant byproduct of evolution, or these magnetic changes in our environment may be subtly tweaking our brain chemistry in ways that we're not aware of. And this goes on into like a fruit fly thing, but I want to stop here just to see like what you guys think about that.
Be pretty cool to weaponize.
Oh God!
Like
oh no, it's terrifying.
You know, EMPs, right? Things, electromagnetic pulses can knock out electronics,
Right.
things like that. But instead of targeting electronics, you start to target the moods of, say, your enemies, and drive them to insanity, just with one gigantic pulse.
Well, and it's interesting that you talk about that because two things come to mind. One, in Ocean's 12, when they robbed the Las Vegas casino, didn't they use
Ocean's 11.
Ocean's 11? They used the pulse, right, to knock out the electricity.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like, that's a really powerful example. And then when I think about like the new cop car sounds, obviously this is a sound thing, but we've already seen that like you can have devices that are engineered to disrupt our nervous systems or our like processors, and that's really disturbing and upsetting to us. So I mean, like you're saying, even in a small amount, that could make a lot of sense too.
Yeah, those, if you can weaponize it, I think it'd be a pretty subtle weapon. It'd be non-conventional psychological warfare, if you can, if that's like a redundant thing, isn't it?
A little bit. Yeah. Cool. Well, okay, so let's get into fruit flies. So this magnetic theory, let's see. Oh, okay. So there have been studies that hinted in certain organisms, such as fruit flies, that there's a protein called cryptochrome, which can also function as a magnetic sensor. The cryptochrome is a key component of the molecular clocks that drive 24-hour circadian rhythms in our cells and tissues, including our brain. So when cryptochrome binds to a light-absorbing molecule called flavin, not only does this tell the circadian clock that it's daytime, but it triggers a reaction that causes the molecular complex to become magnetically sensitive. This is from a behavioral geneticist, again, in the UK. This is a BBC article. But his colleagues have shown that exposure to low-frequency electromagnetic fields can actually reset the timing of these fruit flies' circadian clocks, thus leading to alterations in the timing of their sleep. So if this were true of humans, it might provide an explanation for the abrupt mood changes observed in Weir and Avery's bipolar patients. These patients have fairly dramatic shifts in the timing of their circadian rhythms as they go through their mood cycles, and they also have fairly dramatic changes in the timing and duration of their sleep. However, as interesting as this looks, cryptochrome is also an essential component of the human circadian clock, but it works at a little bit different than the fruit flies. So it looks like human and other mammalian cryptochrome no longer binds to flavin. Without flavin, and without that, we don't know how there could be this magnetic sensitive chemistry trigger happening situation. So with the flies, there was this like added component, but we just don't have that. So the question is, do we have a flavin equivalent? Or could that be the appendix that left us, except for some people? I don't know. But I thought that was kind of cool because now they're trying to talk about what could be the mechanism between our magnetic sense, if it's there or not.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine it's pretty hard to try to figure out, right? Because you have to dive into somebody's brain, right?
Yeah, I mean, so what they're saying is, this guy goes, I think it is unlikely that human cryptochromes are sensitive to magnetic fields unless there are some other molecules inside humans that can detect magnetic fields. But again, it's hard to study because, like you're saying, if you don't know what you're looking for, it's hard to find. And you would need brain access, I think, which is kind of hard.
Yeah, you can't just pop somebody's skull open and be like, you mind if I just leave this here for a little bit? Just walk around. We want to see something.
Do you feel really terrible all of a sudden? Like, good luck signing people up for that.
Do you feel an impending sense of doom?
Right, exactly. And so in here they start talking about like the 75% water argument, but people have dismissed that because they say that it's not like we have a lot of water sloshing around. It's more like integrated water. And let's see. They get into roots and stuff. I mean, I could go more into this, but I think that was kind of the crux of it. You know, they talk about plant cells and how those are sensitive to tidal forces. But again, it's not obvious why human cells would or wouldn't also be sensitive. So very inconclusive. And I think it's interesting that like, gosh, we've been thinking about moon correlations for so long, and like this is as far as we've gotten. Like, and I tried looking for more current stuff, but there's really not a lot of research into this kind of association, which I don't know. If we had a whole new sense, I think that'd be kind of cool.
That'd be very cool. Is there like a circular thing between like a chicken and the egg thing between the moods and circadian rhythms? So if the mood affects the circadian rhythms, or do the circadian rhythms affect the moods?
Right. Well, they're saying like the bipolar patients, the mood swings were rhythmic and the rhythms appeared to correlate with certain gravitational cycles of the moon. And I think anytime you have repetition or patterns, which lead to predictability, and when those predictions are proven right, you can assume correlation. But as for like the deeper understanding of what that is, it's inconclusive. Yeah, exactly. They don't know yet for sure.
I mean, it would be pretty cool to find out there's some molecule that you can tamper with and either reset your like. If I had an ability to just never sleep again, but be able to have like the benefits of sleeping, that'd be kind of nice to do.
Right. You could just like take some flavin vitamin supplements or like flavin substitute.
Yeah,
supplements. Well, and like, okay, so this is all getting into maybe like internal biological processes, which is like, you know, all well and good. But throughout the entirety of our existence, we've had more of a lived experience with the moon. So this is what I mean. So let's look at some of the moon names. Like January is the wolf moon. And often it's called that because you have wolves hunting and the coldness of air. It's time for rejuvenation and beginning. So like the way that we call the moons seemed to tether into like environmental observation. Same thing like with the worm moon, right? As winter gives way to a thaw, earthworms begin to break to the surface.
I'm going to object 1 second.
Are you?
Yeah. Were we calling this stuff the worm moon thousands of years ago, or are we just doing it now?
It's a good question. Let's see. Worm moon. I'm sure. Let's see. Okay. So today, most of the names of the full moons that are typically found in publications like the Old Farmer's Almanac come from the Algonquin tribes who lived throughout New England and the Great Lakes region.
Algonquin.
Mm-hmm.
The Iroquois Confederacy.
Ah, yes. Mm-hmm. And so it's interesting because, again, you know, we just adopted these names, but so much of them are coming through kind of like, yeah, like what's going on. Like here's, yeah, you have like the harvest moon, the fall.
Yeah, it makes sense that it's tied in with farming.
Yeah.
Because they would be the ones that would be observing all of this, right? Be paying closer attention to it than say a hunter would or something like that.
Right. And it's interesting too because it's like you can see, I mean, yeah, like when you were talking, Nick, about the moon being like a clock, it's so much more of an effective clock than the sun because it has a longer time span. And if you name it as such with these changing seasons and these changing, you know, maybe agricultural activities.
You use the moon to count the suns.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, you use the moon and its phases to count how many suns have passed. So they work in symbiosis with each other.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, because the sun's always moving, right? Or
Mhm.
we're moving. Yeah. I'm still, I barely notice certain things because, like, what is it? I never even thought about like the sun, right? And then we moved to this new place here, and we have like a shade thing in the backyard, and I couldn't figure out why for some some parts of the year we were getting more shade and like not for other parts of the year. And then I was like, oh, you dingus, like you just have to rotate it because the sun's always going this way. But if you, anyway, long story short, me and the sun are not on good terms. No, but anyway, I just thought that it was kind of interesting to get off of like a biological introspection about the moon, and then to think about some of the more stories and myths that we bring about it, and then just think about the two together, like coexisting. You know, if we discovered like a connection to the magnetic forces, does that prove old myths, do you think, like the emotions and
I mean, I don't think that we need to have science prove it. I think that it's one of those things that's like it's meta true, right? Like I don't know. I mean, like this is hard for science to do. We're trying to ask them to quantify something kind of intangible and metaphysical. So I don't necessarily think it has to. I don't think science has to prove anything for it to be true. I think there's certain elements of truth about it, regardless.
Yeah, in the very least, it grounds it, right? Like
Mhm.
it, I mean, yeah, it would. I think it would just simply ground it. It wouldn't make it more or less true. Truer.
But you're not the like slightest bit interested in like, okay, so you started out when talking about the moon, like the yin and the yang, right? Like the,
Mhm.
you know, it's one side of a coin. And we got into like this study about like bipolar patients and the switching of rhythms or the switching of phases, which is also a duality. I
Mhm.
just find it interesting, right? Because it's not like back in the day they were treating mental illness in the same way. I don't know how they would have had mechanisms to make those correlations, and yet they did, interestingly enough, and it fits really perfect. So it's like an intuitive knowing that we're just like knowing. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, most things are. They were intuitively held. I mean, like the Greeks didn't see crazy people as crazy. They saw them as more blessed, I guess, by the gods. They're more they they saw them that they were freer, so they must, because they could just behave however they wish. So therefore, they were blessed in a certain way by these gods. And in myths, the sun and the moon have always worked together, whether they be brother and sister lovers or brother and brother. And I'm not sure if it's Aztec or no, it's not Aztec. If it's Mayan, where it's two brothers. One became the sun and one became the moon after going through the underworld. I think it's Mayan. But yeah, no, it's now I've lost my thought.
Well, there is a lot about the moon. I mean, you know, just even looking at like the moon as male, if you subscribe to that, there's like the Intuit or Inuit. Let's see here. They have the legend of the moon god
Aningan.
Aningan. You know about him, Nick?
Yeah, I think I'm on the same page.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so, yeah, I mean, there's like a whole story about him. And then you also have the masculine moon in Norse mythology. There's also the Ifki Ibibio people in Nigeria and West Africa. And they believe that the sun and the moon are husband and wife who once lived on Earth. So, yeah, I mean, there's just so much meaning that's been taken from the moon. And, you know, when you think about it, like the sun is kind of what grows our plants and our food, but like did the moon do much besides light up the night? Like I don't know, it just seems kind of like curious to me that there's so much discussed about the moon, but again, like it's
a
just
reparative energy.
there.
I mean, like, so
Yeah.
if the sun you know, emits energy, so does the moon, because the moon is literally just the sun's light bouncing off of rocks. So you could think about it as like a sun lens. But it definitely has its own sort of personality, and we created the personality through our mythology and our folklores. And that's what I mean about, like, do we need a scientist to tell us that the moon affects us? Well, not really, because psychologically we've been talking about the moon for eons. So the moon does affect us. The moon affects us within our storytelling, within our frameworks of understanding things. And so yeah, I definitely think that there's merit to the moon being a restorative sort of energy, especially as you were talking about the coral. Apparently corals have crazy sex during full moons. And it would make sense that we sleep during the night when the moon is watching over us, and having that level of sleep is reparative for our minds and our bodies. And perhaps those who spend too much time out with the moon lose themselves and become a little bit crazy.
And the question becomes,
moonstruck.
Does the moon affect our behavior, which then affects our storytelling, or does the moon affect our storytelling, which then affects our behavior due to?
I think it's the Ouroboros. It's yes and yes. that's
Thank
the
you,
only way I
Mike,
can
for
think
wording
about
the
it.
question. Yeah. Well, and that's kind of what I was dancing around, was like, it's both. And it's just funny because, like, we've believed about these moon phases, and it's been part of our human consciousness, part of our history for so long. And yet today there's many people that disregard these legends and myths.
Mm-hmm. Because people disregard anything that's not measured by science, and that's their failure. Because more and more science has proven, showing us that the people 2,000 years ago had a deeper understanding about the mechanisms of life than we do right now. So,
yeah,
can't even take into account all the different possibilities, right? Like there's
maybe they just can't measure flavins in humans. It's about the flavins, guys.
Is it riboflavin?
I wanted to say riboflavin, but it's not. It's just the flavins. But yeah, no, humans, it could be ribo. Who knows? I don't know.
It's strange how we use the word science. Not like we don't use it in any real way anymore. It's become one of those things that just has no meaning, right?
It's an authority figure instead of a pursuit.
Skeptical, skeptical tool. It's you have to take in all the possibilities and run experiments.
But also, too, science. It's the fact that science has shied away from the questions that we really care about. Are
because
there
it's deemed them
UFOs?
stupid.
Does the moon affect us? But I mean, if they have hard science to prove one way or the other, then why not? I guess maybe it's grants. You can't really get grants to do stuff that's fringe. Maybe that's the issue.
Of course. But it doesn't mean that you also don't need a whole lot of money to implement the scientific method. Now,
and
tools.
Why is it fringe? Right. But also, why is it fringe? If we've been talking about it for thousands of years as a species, and suddenly it's fringe, it's weird.
Off of it. How are you supposed to make money off of that?
You sell flavin boosters. Hello. Come on now.
So that sounds like some snake oil to me.
Dude, get your alpha waves back, man.
Wait, are you advertising Alpha Brain? Is that what you said?
Oh my God. No, but you know what I would say though? What I would say is you do see, in the absence of reputable institutions talking about this, you get these pop-ups of I don't know how I feel about, there's earthing where you walk barefooted on grass, and I feel that to be very calming. There's a tactile response. It's just nice. And if you're walking barefoot in a grassy area, you're not answering emails or having a bill payment up, right? You're just going to be chill. But people will sell stuff that is a mat that you put on your floor, and that's supposed to replicate the effects because of the magnetic. And that's where I'm kind of
no, it's cheap. It's just a simulated thing. It's like going to a tanning bed versus actually going outside and tanning.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a synthetic bastardization of something you get naturally.
Yeah, and it's just there's something missing from the whole experience, because it is really nice to go out and just walk barefoot, right? Or I went 5 or 6 years without walking out in the sun without a shirt on. and I finally did it one like summer day, and it just felt amazing. It's just you not having that experience for that long. You feel like you're reconnecting back to nature in some minor way.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah.
can't do that with some magnetized mat on your floor.
Oh,
But
it's
you
true.
can with Alpha Brain. This episode is brought to you by Alpha Brain. No, I'm kidding.
$13.99, 5 installments.
We're edging out Alex Jones.
Yeah, make the moon's energy work. Oh wait, does he have something like that? No.
Yeah.
Wait,
Yeah,
really?
No, it's
Yeah,
a
that's
joke.
what I
Look
wrote
at
you.
you.
It is
Oh no. Sorry, I don't.
Make the frog straight again. Get out.
Yeah.
Oh no. Oh God. Well, I think that's where I'm gonna cut it, guys.
No, it's over now.
That's good.
No, I mean, but that is kind of everything I had. I have some stuff about like Artemis and like the Greeks, but I don't know that we need to go there. It's
Sure. I just named it Moon Myths. I should have just. You should have told me what to name it.
I sent you the article.
Brought to you by Alpha Brain.
Oh God.
Well, I have a couple fun facts for people about the moon, and specifically what it does to animals. So, I guess we can.
Let's talk about that coral sex. Woo,
Yeah,
coral
well,
sex.
Apparently, corals love to have sex
wow.
during the full moon.
I must
that
have
is-
been coral back in another life.
That is
But
very
boom. No. Poor Nick. I'm sorry.
And apparently apparently badgers get pee shy during the new moon.
Stop.
Yeah, no, seriously. You were saying that pets tend to get more injured, and that is true. There's a 28% increase in dog visits to the emergency rooms on full moon nights.
See? Twice confirmed.
Yeah. Let's see. Oh yeah, clams close during the full moon, which is interesting. They don't really know why. Yeah. And of course we have also scorpions that glow blue during the moonlight.
Blue.
Mm-hmm.
That's wild.
So, yeah, there's a lot of things in nature that are affected by the moon, and it would be silly for us to think that we aren't as well. I mean, come on. I don't know how many times I heard when I was a kid, we're the human animal, we're part of the ecosystem, and now all of a sudden it's like, no, that doesn't affect us at all. We have no connections to this earth.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I mean, what?
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, like the more you start thinking about the moon and all it does, and just for the simple fact that it takes on a lot of the craters, which I still find very odd. How can it have so many craters and it's just suddenly where asteroids are, and we only got hit by that one? It's just
Well, fun fact about the moon as well. The moon was once part of the Earth. About 4 billion years ago, when the Earth was still a molting ball of flying rock, it was hit by a large asteroid that sent a good chunk of it out into space, and that chunk of it became the moon. So the moon is actually a piece of the Earth that from a long, long time ago. It's our missing piece.
Our moon.
And
so maybe
it acts as our shield.
Right. Well, and that
Also
makes
doesn't
me
have an atmosphere too, right?
No atmosphere.
Probably why it has
That's
more
weird.
Craters than Earth.
Oh, that makes sense.
Also, another
Thank you
fun
for
fact
that.
about the moon.
Yes.
It's perfectly proportioned to allow for solar eclipses.
What is that? What? Because it's a circle?
Think about it. No, I mean, it's the exact perfect distance away between the Earth and the sun to allow for a full solar eclipse.
No, that
type of
freaks me
thing-
out. I don't know why.
That type of thing actually isn't all that common. So it's actually perfect. It's perfectly suited for Earth.
Why is it like that?
I don't know.
That's
No,
weird.
It's just
I don't
exactly
like
the
it.
right distance to allow for a full solar eclipse.
No, stuff like that creeps me out so much.
I'm pretty sure the moon is just a spotlight, so that when Truman runs away, we can turn it on and find him.
It's made of cheese.
There's
Yeah.
that. Well, but do you guys remember in the Wolverine origin story where his lady friend is telling him the story about the Wolverine and the moon?
Mm-hmm.
and how the Wolverine is longing for its lost moon person or self. Like there's this recognition that the moon belonged to it, and that made me think about the like if that's a real story, which it could just be a story that happens to be similar to what really happened, but like I don't know. Okay, let me back up. This is why I'm getting a weird feeling right now as I'm talking about this. Okay, so one of my coworkers, I told her that we have been harvesting monarch caterpillars. Not so much harvesting them. I have one milkweed plant, and it
We're
got like a
going
bunch
to
of
send them to a
caterpillars.
factory.
No, I mean we're gonna send them
That's
free.
why we're harvesting them.
No, I mean we're trying to save them and like make sure they're good. And we have 2 in chrysalis right now. Now I read one study recently that said if you electrocute a caterpillar, it will learn to avoid the electrocution source. When it then becomes a butterfly, the butterfly also will know not to touch that electrocution source.
Why in the world? And see, this is why science is so stupid sometimes.
I knew you were going to go there. Yeah, it's
why
mean.
in the world be
It's
like,
really
I wonder if
mean.
the caterpillar will avoid an electric shock.
They always shock
Please
stuff.
give me $5 million to
I know.
investigate this.
I know. It's
cares?
messed up. It's quite
Jesus.
messed up.
Yeah.
Yes.
Stupid.
But, but they were talking about this idea that, the thing like melts to like a goo and then it totally reassembles and it still has like a memory, right? So like, how does that work? And then my coworker, she told me that these monarchs, okay, so they how do I say this? There's like 4 stages. So the monarchs start in one area and they breed and then they migrate and then they turn into caterpillars and then they migrate again. So basically there's like 3 generations before they finally get to the location in Mexico where they like have a super bloom of butterflies. And then that 3rd generation flies the entire distance back to the original source. And then it takes 3 more generations to come back down. So how is it that a butterfly that's freshly born in Mexico knows exactly where to go? And then those butterflies that are born up there know that they only go 1/3 of the way each way. And so when I say that, I wonder like these generational, ancestral, cultural stories about the moon being a missing piece of us when it literally is a missing piece of us. Like, how did we know? It's weird. So that's all I'm going to say.
I mean, like it's all rooted so much in archetypes and beliefs, right? So I mean, like the moon is the missing piece of the sun. The sun and the moon are in a dance to chase each other. I mean, that was one of the original mythologies, right?
True.
The sun was an entity and the moon is an entity. They're in love, but they're destined to never meet. That's why sometimes in the daytime you can see the moon because she's waiting for her lover. You know what I mean? So it's just that we anthropomorphize everything and we kind of tend to put our mythology onto inanimate objects. And so those inanimate objects embody that mythology and those archetypes.
Yeah. That's just interesting. I don't know. I start to think about stuff like even, the word, lunatic and lunar and moonstruck, just interesting linguistical correlations that come back around in time to have new meaning. It's just interesting. We're funny little meaning makers as humans. I think that's all I have to say about that.
Mm-hmm. All right. Nice.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Ayla, for entertaining us on this Lunar Monday.
Waning Gibbous.
Waning Gibbous. There we go. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate all of you that take the time to check us out. We hope that you enjoyed this episode. I certainly did. Well, let us know what your favorite moon is. Maybe you're a fan of Ganymede off of Jupiter or Europa off of Jupiter again. Jupiter's got a lot of moons. I think our moon's the best, but
I like our moon too. And I believe actually before we go, we do need to give a shout out to somebody who has once described our show as talking about X-Files shit. I don't think we went there quite this time, but in future episodes, we'll definitely talk about more creepy stuff.
Close enough. I mean,
Close enough.
you were almost there with like Artemis because Artemis becomes a demon in the lesser key of Solomon, and then maybe a little. You're basically there too with the notion of losing oneself in the night or the moon, and that's where the real adventure starts.
Oh
So you're
yeah,
close enough. But yeah,
much like the caterpillar that
the
melts
caterpillar.
away. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know. I'm trying to bring it back to my butterfly tangent.
Returning to the primordial generational
Goo.
DNA memory.
Right,
of
that will
everything.
remember what it ate on Monday after it's become a total butterfly, and then
Did you-
three
Did you
generations
just
know
stomp
how
on
to.
my sign off for a
We
reason?
could-
I didn't. No.
Okay.
Well, there was a reason.
Okay, let's get to
so
the reason then.
it's just for a shout out for verbal.com, which is a podcast startup. So we are now as this is being recorded on YouTube, as soon as this is done, it's going to get automatically ingested and uploaded, or the audio will, on verbal.com. So it's
Awesome. And people can go check that out at verbal.com. And is this happening for a myriad of podcasts?
Yeah, I think it's happening for a bunch of different podcasts, and we're one of them. But they're a brand new startup, so we're part of that.
Heck yeah. Well, please go check them out, verbal.com. They're being awesome by supporting us and integrating us onto their site. So please go check them out and leave them some feedback if you have the chance. That's really cool to have the opportunity to be a part of something new. So thank you guys. We very much appreciate it. And thank you for listening, you guys. Please consider leaving us a thumbs up. Consider leaving us a comment and perhaps a subscription to our YouTube page. That would very much help us out. But in the meantime, you stay out there, Cognonauts, and we'll catch you on the next Exofathom. Good night.
Peace.
Later.